This is Dave, aka the Guru, and another tutorial on using GameSalad. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do custom collision animations. And so one of the first things that we need to understand when we're going to do this is that the order in which everything fires in this is critical. Especially with the 1.2.5 update, it's really tightened up the timing. And to make this look effective, to make this look without any jittering or any kind of lag or any of that, we need to follow layer order. So there are a couple things I would recommend before you watch this video, if you don't already know, is one, go to my YouTube site. You can type in Guru, GameSalad Guru, and find my YouTube site. I'll also put a link in the description of this video. I'm also Lost Oasis Games is my avatar on the forums, GameSalad forums. You can find the link to my video channel on YouTube, which is all free. All my videos, I have like over 100 videos on there for free that show you how to do custom collisions using Physics Editor, which is what I'm using to create my custom collision shapes. And then also you can see the video on proper layer order and how to layer your code. We'll go through some of that, what is related to this in here, but I would recommend watching those videos in preparation for this series. So let's just take a quick look. I'm going to just shrink down GameSalad. And I've got my all my images. I'm using the Block Buddies Night template created by Sprite Attack that I bought from GS Helper as an example in here, and a couple backgrounds that my partner Dane created for me a while ago as well. But I just want to show you, I've got all my animations kind of broken out. This is the output from the collision editor for each one of my animations, and you'll see that I've named them like the exact name of the animations. You really need to be organized in this, especially if you're going to be dealing with a lot of frames. Just so it's important that everything get matched up properly, because all these shapes are different based on where the position of the actor is, the animation. And if you don't have them matched up, it won't be right. So, what I did first was did all the custom work on my animations, folded everything and organized everything so that as I'm working and bringing those things in, I can have a good workflow. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with making a couple of variables, two that we need. We're going to make, let's make the first one here, and then I'll explain. This one's going to be called move trigger. And what this one's going to do is it's going to calculate all the different movements. Oh, I spelled that wrong. It's going to calculate all the different movements that we're going to do. Now, traditionally, in some of the ways that like platformer type movement and stuff has been taught in GameSalad is people use booleans. I'm not a huge fan of booleans. I don't use booleans very rarely. I use integers because it allows me, when you have code and you're trying to control one part of the code, so say like movement, you're not really ever going to have a lot of instances where you're doing two things at the same time. So you're trying to move left and move right, or walk left and walk right, and then jump left and jump right, or attack left and attack right, or whatever. You're not trying to attack and then walk, or attack and then jump, or whatever. So very rarely do you have these multiple conditions at the same time. But when you're using booleans, you can get all crossed up, and so you'll have way more conditions in your logic and all this kind of stuff, and it just bloats everything. So what I do is I create an integer, I call it a move trigger, and then since I only need it to be one value at a time, I step the integer up based on my movement. So if I want to be idle, I'm 1, if or 0 if I want to walk left, I'm 1, walk 2 is right, and I make a list and I put all those values. This allows me to narrow the conditions in my code. I don't have all these booleans that can cause this crash in my code when they conflict with each other, because that's what happens when you're trying to force a whole bunch of data to fight for control over a particular actor or branch of code. It's kind of like a traffic intersection where all the lights are just green, and you're going to have an accident. You need to have red lights and green lights. And so since an integer can only be one number at a time, by doing that, I force or block out all the other code that could potentially cause an issue. Eliminates debugging, makes it easier, just makes it it's just a better methodology for creating logic. And then the other thing that I'm going to need is to know which way my actor is facing for all my code. So I'm going to go ahead and make a facing integer as well. So now let's go ahead and let's make our actor. And the first one we're going to build today is we're going to build our controlling actor. And since it's important where everything is in the code scan in what we're about to do, or even in your general game, normally I build a controlling actor and have managing actors off the scene where I can put in blocks of code, and that way I can stack that code wherever I particularly need it in my layer order. So I very rarely have code out in my actors on the scene that aren't related to them. I don't do that. I don't put stuff in background images. I don't do any of that. I keep all my code in that is extraneous material. I build it all outside in managers, output it to game variables, and then allow my actors to read all that. That way I can just kind of move things around in the layer order, and I'm not trapped by my image layering in this. So we're going to go ahead and the first actor we're going to create is the controlling actor, and this is going to control the stepping of that variable that we made, the move trigger. So we're going to call this controller. And we'll come in. I like to make all my managers a different color so that it's easily identifiable on scene and in the palette. I'm just going to uncheck movable. And so the first thing we want to do with our actor is we're going to grab a rule, and we want to know which way he's facing. That's critical information for everything else we're going to do. So we're going to address that. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just label this facing left. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to control everything. Since I'm using keyboard here, I'm going to do everything with keyboard controls, but you can easily swap this over. It's the same conditional statements, so you can easily switch this over to buttons that you have on the scene just by putting attributes out there. And at the end of the series, I'll go ahead after I've gone through all this, because I don't want to put people through that know coding and can just go ahead and extrapolate this into touch controls. But I'll show you how to build a set of touch controls at the end of the video for those who need to, and they can watch it. So just kind of follow along for now, and then we'll get to that in the last video of the series. So I'm going to use keyboard controls. So what I want to do is I want to monitor the last key that was pressed that relates to facing. And so you know what? Before I do that, let me do this with you, because this is normally how I work. I already have this in my head. So I'm going to forget that for right now. But let's make a note. Let's make a note of our control list. Okay? So let's make a list of the numbers that we're going to use and what they're going to mean in that move trigger. So let's go ahead and flesh out our control list here. And so let's go ahead. 0, we're going to just forget about 0. I'm not going to use 0. I'm going to set left facing is going to be the default for my character, which will be 0 on the facing. But on the move, I'm not going to use 0. I'm going to set it to a default of 1, which is going to be idle left. So let's just say 1 is going to be idle left. And then 2, and I always try to keep things in some kind of pattern or order. So I'm going to do idle right. And then 3 is going to be walk left. 4, 4 is going to be walk right. 5 is going to be spear left. 6 is going to be spear right. 4, 5, 6. Sorry about that. 6, 7, because we're going to do 2 attacks in this, is going to be knife left. And 8 is going to be knife right. So now we've addressed all our list of what everything's going to be. So now we can reference this in the code and we don't lose track kind of what we're doing. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and make a rule and let's address our facing. And so we need to know, the first thing we need to know before we get into whether we're idling left, idling right, walking left, walking right, spear left, spear right, knife left, knife right, is we need to know what our facing is going to be. So by default, I'm going to toggle that facing game level variable from 0 to 1. And 0 is going to be default, and I'm going to make the default left facing in this game. And so we're going to say facing left. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use keyboard commands here. So we're going to say, I want to know the last key that was pressed. So we know default is going to be 0. It's going to start at 0. We're going to start at left facing, but we also need to know when we've gone from right to left. So if we start at default at left, we push the right key first. Okay, now it's going to change it to 1, and then we need to know when we go back. So when we're going to know when the left keyboard is down, we're going to change game dot facing back to 0. And then we can just copy this rule. And we can go ahead and change this to right. And we'll just go into this keyboard command and right. And we'll change this to 1. So now we can only be either or. So whichever, if you push both keys down, whichever key goes down first is going to be the one that dominates. And then once you lift, it'll switch to whatever key. So this is why I like to use singles, because it can't be both these numbers at the same time. Something has to win here. So it's going to be the first key that was pressed, or the last key that was pressed is going to make sure facing is the last direction we were trying to go. And we're going to separate out this code because we want this just to be basically based on the last time either one of these keys were pressed. The rest of our code is going to have conditions in it, and we're going to reference this condition. So we don't want any other conditions in here to muddy the waters or muck things up. The only thing we're looking for this variable to tell us is what was the last key that was pressed. Was it right or was it left? So that'll solve that. So the next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and set up our idle position, right? So we got idle left. We've got our idle left here. And we're going to do a few conditions in here. And we're going to say, first thing we want to know is which way are we facing. We're going to make sure we're facing left. So we're going to say when attribute game dot facing equals 0, right? Because that's left, 0 is left. okay? And we can even add this in here if we wanted to. And we'll call this game.facing. And then 0 equals left, and then 1 equals right. Okay, that'll help us keep track of all this kind of stuff. Okay, so now we've got game facing equals 0, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to watch the other conditions in this. So we're going to use, let's identify some of these things here up here. So walk left is going to be left arrow. And then walk right is going to be right arrow key. And then spear, the basic spear function here is just going to be the space bar. And that'll be for both, because depending on whether we're spearing left or right, that code is going to look at the facing. It's just both of these will both look at the space bar. So we can put that in here, and you'll see as we go. And then knife left, I'm going to make the S key. Whoop. And same way with this one is going to be the S key. Let me capitalize this. And the S key. So now we know the keys that we're using. And idle, there isn't going to be any keys. It's just going to be looking for no key commands. So idle left and right is going to be no key. Okay. And so in idle left, we're going to want to look at all these other conditions. We want to make sure that right and left arrow key are up, the space bar is up, and the S key is up. So we're going to add those conditions into here. So we're going to go ahead and get 1, 2, 3, 4 more conditions. And we're going to go ahead and say when keyboard left is up and and keyboard right is up, and then keyboard spacebar is up, and then keyboard S key is up. So we want to know if all those are up, which means we're not calling in for any other kind of movement, and facing is 0. We're going to face left. So we're going to change attribute game dot move trigger, and idle left is 1. Okay, so now we can just duplicate this and make a few modifications. So we're going to go ahead and say right, and we know that right facing is 1, so we'll go ahead and modify that, and all that is true. And then we know that if we want to face right, we're going to move it to 2. Okay, so now let's do the walking code. So basically with the walking code, we're going to want to have a similar situation. So we're going to go ahead and grab this code, same thing, and we'll just modify this, and we'll say walk left. And then so game facing equals 0. These other keys are up, and the left keyboard now is down, the left key arrow. And now we know that walk left is going to be 3. So we're going to change that to 3. And there we have our walk left. And so now let's go ahead and grab this, and we'll modify this part. See, once you build your code right and you've planned it out, you see how easy and how quickly I can do all these things without having to do a whole bunch of stuff. It's just a series of modifications. And so I'm going to change this to up. And I'm going to go ahead and change my right arrow to down. And then this is going to be 4. And we're done with that. So let's go ahead and we'll grab, let me grab the left one here. And I can change this front part to spear. So we got our spear left. And we know our spear left is going to be 5, and it's going to be the space bar. So we're going to go ahead and move this to up. And left is 0. And we're going to grab our space bar and say down. And spear left is 5. So I'm going to change this to 5. And let's go ahead and grab this walk right, and then I won't have to change a whole bunch of other conditions in there. And we'll change this to spear. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and just swap this. Oops, sorry, that's up. And we want the space bar down. And our spear right, as we see up top, is going to be 6. So there we go. So now let's go ahead and grab this spear left, and we're going to make this knife left. Oop, I didn't need to do that. That's why I did it that way. So we got knife left, and up, and then down on the S. And our knife left is 7. And then we'll go ahead and grab this spear right. And we'll go ahead and change this to knife right. And we're just going to go ahead and switch this to down. And then we know this is 8. And so basically, what we've done here is we've built out all our code. We've got facing, then idle, walking, spear left, spear right that we can do. So let's go ahead and just do a test with this initial code. So let me do a quick save here. And let me go ahead into this actor, and let me grab a display text. And we'll go ahead and let's monitor game.move trigger. And then let's also go ahead and throw another. I love the new display text that we have here. Having multiples. Well, you used to have to drag all kinds of actor. And we'll grab the facing. And we'll make the facing a dark color too. So we'll make that a dark blue so we can see it. And we'll leave this as black. And I'll just bump this down, let's say 40 pixels or negative 40. So we'll have facing on the bottom and our move trigger on the top. So let's go ahead and just drag our actor onto the scene here, give ourselves some space, and let's run through our keyboard commands and see how everything's working. So let's go ahead and let me push the space bar, and then we got 5, and see we're going back to 1. Okay, when we lift off, it goes back to the conditions, all the conditions. So let's press the S key. That's 7. That was moving left. Okay. And so by staggering that way, we know all our left movements, since it's every other, are odd numbers, and our right movements are even. So there we are, moving left, and see we're idle at 2. And I'm pressing the space bar, and I've got an error in my stabbing. We'll have to check that. Let's try the knife right. And the knife, I've got something wrong in my knife. Let me go back to left and just check the stabbing. So I have something wrong. See how easily you can identify that now? So I know I have something wrong in my right facing knife right. Yep. All right. There's a wrong right there. 1. Okay. And then spear right as well. That's 1 is right. So there we go. We found the error real quick. You can see when you're organized how quickly you can find things. And when your code is ordered and everything's labeled, and you've done a little bit of planning, you can see how easily I was able to debug that. So let's try it again. And there we go, and the stabbing. And so everything works correctly, and now we know this is basically how I build games. I methodically build, plan my blocks of code out, think about how they're going to work with my other blocks of code, because I've already got the next thing we're going to get into is building our bringing in our actors and stuff, and then we're going to build the mechanism that actually spawns and creates these custom animations. But these are the building blocks. If I didn't know how I was going to implement my controller, then I wouldn't have any idea how I'm going to go ahead and craft the logic or the code in my spawning actor. And so then that, once I've determined how I'm going to do the code in my spawning actor, then that determines how I'm going to build my code in my individual actors. And so now that I've streamlined and modified having this controlling actor and having one variable, what you're going to see is my spawning code is going to look at that one variable as well as one. So basically this whole thing I'm going to show you with all these characters is stabbing left and right and walking left and right and all this kind of stuff is all controlled by 3 game level variables. One for facing, which very rarely changes, one for all the movement, and then one as we chart the frames in the animation as they go. That's it. And so, but that's because I plan the code this way. Once I've planned and methodically planned my code and streamlined, now you're going to see what I'm talking about, integrated code. Why? Because everything in this system, all my code branches and that we're going to build out here, which essentially seem complex, all come back and revolve around 3 game level attributes. So all these branches and strings of code that we're going to build together all basically flow out of 3 game level attributes. That is refined, integrated code. That all my code was built essentially around a main series of variables, and then I streamlined how I'm going to construct the branches off of that. And so you're starting to understand kind of how streaming, flowing logic, integrated really starts to work. So this is our first video. We've built our controller. We've laid the ground floor. So when we come back in the next video, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get all our actors. I'll do a couple of them to show you, and then we'll get all the actors imported. I'll show you how to set them up and then bring them all in. And we'll go ahead and do a prototype, and we'll do the first one. We'll write the code that we're going to put in those, and then we can go ahead and save that as a custom, and then just go ahead and modify it. We'll kind of go back and forth between those two once we start to build our spawning actors. So anyways, this is Dave, the Guru, and I'll see you in part 2.